Hey everybody, Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're looking at another Martin Wallace game. Now I've gone over Brass before, and you saw that I loved the game a lot, and that's because I really do like Martin Wallace games in general, and this one is no exception. So this one, Automobile, is about the early beginnings of the automobile industry, building cars, selling cars, hiring employees, and trying to best make a profit in the early eras of a new invention. The game is about 2 hours long. It's for 3 to 5 players and plays in about 2 hours, and is a highly strategic, mathematical type of game. That said, let's take a look at what's inside the box and how the game plays. So here we see an example of some of the player pieces that are included in Automobile. And first you can see that there are several different types of factories, and these are depicted here. You have your regular factories, which are going to allow you to produce cars based on where you build them, and they're going to cost money to build on different spaces depending on what the value of the car is. But for more factories you have, the more cars you'll be able to produce. Additionally, each player will have one what's called parts factory, and the parts factory will make producing cars cheaper. So it's beneficial to have this on a spot where you think you're going to need to produce a lot of cars, and that you'll be able to sell a lot of cars after you've produced them. Each player is also going to have several of these little car tokens, and these will just depict cars that you've produced on each of your factories. So if you decide to produce 4 cars on a factory, you'll take 4 of these little chits, you'll place them on the factory, and as you sell them, you'll be removing them and earning money for them. Additionally, you're going to have salespeople, and these salespeople will allow you to sell cars before you go into selling based on demand. So you'll basically be putting these guys into a sales room. They'll be, pitching to customers, selling cars, and they'll allow you to sell a certain amount of cars each turn in order to get rid of them before maybe the market bottoms out during the demand phase. The rest of the pieces included in the game are typically wood pieces, and so you're going to see here several types of cubes. First we have these large and smaller black wooden cubes, and these are going to be loss cubes or debt cubes. These are things you do not want to collect. And you'll collect these for not being able to use salesmen or not being able to sell cards, and they're going to cost you money at the end of each turn based on how many you have. The white cubes are what are called R&D cubes, and these are going to be used in order to perform certain actions. You can spend them to do executive decisions, which will modify how you can sell cars or maybe some factories that you can close down, and you can use them in order to move further ahead developing new cars throughout the game. The cylinders we have 3 white cylinders and several gray cylinders, and what these are markers for different executive decisions. These white ones will be used for players who get to sell multiple cars at the same time at full price, and the gray ones will also allow you to sell multiple cars at the same time, but at a reduced price. Finally, we have this money. And as you can see, my money is still in the plastic because I absolutely refuse to play with paper money. But as far as paper money goes, this is actually very nice. It's made of a decent quality paper, it's a nice color, and it's got some interesting pictures on it of old cars. But again, I don't use it. But if you're looking for paper money, very good quality. So the most remarkable thing about Automobile is probably the board. And as you can see, this is a beautiful board. It's got a lot going on, so we'll just kind of try and go over it real fast. So around the outside of the board you can see several different types of cars, starting with these least advanced cars over here, which are actually mid-range cars, depicted by brown, and then you see some silver cars starting to pop up, which are mass-produced cars, and then later on you see some of the golden cars here, which are high-end cars. And these are going to be able to be sold for different prices. They'll cost more to make the high-end cars, but you'll also be able to sell them for a guaranteed amount of money. Whereas some of the middle and lower end cars are going to either sell for the maximum price, or you can actually take a loss on them. It's not a loss, but you take less of a profit on them and sell them at a reduced price to guarantee that you may get them out of your hands so that you don't earn debt. Additionally, throughout the board you can see several other features. First, we have a turn track area, and you can see this is always going to be a 4-turn game. And below this you can see some colors, and that's going to dictate what type of demand there is for cars throughout the games. Next to that, you're going to see a phase track, which is going to keep track of all of the phases you do on each turn. Over here you can see these are sales rooms for cars, and this is where you're going to be able to sell cars before the end of the turn when you're looking at demand. So there'll be a constant demand for cars here, and you can use salesmen to sell your cars to get rid of them before you have to deal with general demand from the market. General demand will be determined each turn by some specific tiles that you'll be drawing at the beginning of each round, and each player is going to have some knowledge of what the demand is for each type of car. So they'll draw a tile and they'll put it in this area face down, and you'll have an idea maybe there's a 3 demand here, so you can try and figure out what the total demand is for cheap cars, or what the total demand is for expensive cars, or for middle range cars. And you're going to try and bet, based on what cars you produce, how many you'd like to produce, and how many you think you can sell each round. Now you're not going to want to underestimate because you won't make enough money, and you're not going to want to overestimate because if you don't sell cars, you will take a penalty for any cars you have left. Along the left-hand side of the board next to the cars here, you can see character spaces for 6 different individuals who were involved in the early production of cars. And all of these people are going to have special abilities. So some of them may give you more what are called development cubes. Some of them may make it so that you can build an extra factory on your turn to produce more cars. And various other things that will alter the gameplay. Some of them make it so that you don't have to pay as much debt on cars that you haven't sold, and so forth and so on. So the game is divided into sequences, as I said, and each turn will be divided into a different amount of phases. And these phases are pretty much constant throughout the game, and you're going to go through them in sequence, keeping track of them on this track here. And the first sequence is going to be drawing demand tiles. And as I said, each turn, depending on what cars are in demand, you're going to draw demand tiles for the players and place them in these boxes. And you'll have some idea of what the demand is. You'll use that to plan the rest of your turn. After that, everybody's going to select characters, and as I said, there are the characters on the left-hand side, and they'll provide special abilities, and they'll kind of dictate what you want to do on your turn. So if you have Ford, for example, he allows you to build extra factories in an area where you already have one, or Kettering down here allows you to take extra research and development cubes, which can be used for certain things like developing further along the car track in order to build better cars. After that is done, you move on to the 3 actions phase, and you can see these marked here by 1, 2, and 3. And everybody's going to go around the table and take 3 actions in player order. And these actions can be a variety of other things. You can build factories on these different types of cars, and each area can only have 1 player on it. So, for example, the first cars here can have 1 player on them, and you'll be able to build factories on those, and the amount of factories you have will allow you to dictate how many cars you can produce at that location. So, for example, if you're to have 2 factories on a brown space, you can produce 4 to 7 cars for $70 a piece. And these will be cars you're trying to sell in order to make a profit, and you can see here that brown cars can bring in a maximum of $150 in profit. Your other options on your turns will be able to place salesmen, and salesmen go in this area over here, and they're going to allow you to sell cars regardless of what the demand is. So if you have a certain amount of salesmen here, and the amount of salesmen that can be placed will change in different rounds. So in rounds 1 through 4 there'll be 3 in here, and 2 through 4 there'll be 3 more, and 3 through 4 they'll add another one. So as you can see throughout the game, the amount of salesmen you can place will go up, and these will allow you to sell cars based on where you place them come time to place salesmen into the sales room. A third action you can take is to take R&D cubes, and R&D cubes will allow you to move further along this track, skipping things that perhaps like cars that you don't want to build. And this is important because you're going to want to build things that maybe other people aren't selling. So it might be important for you to pass all of these first 4 brown cars and get yourself up to the silver car before anybody else, so you can mass produce a lot of these cheap cars and sell them off when nobody else really can satisfy the demand. Finally, or not finally, but there's 2 more actions. You can produce cars, and producing cars, as I said earlier, depends on how many factories you have at a location. And with 2 factories, with brown, you can produce a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 7 cars. And you're going to want to do this based on what you think the total demand is for the turn, plus any cars you think you can sell with your salesmen. Finally, you're allowed to close down spaces where you're currently producing cars. And this is going to allow you to, 1, get rid of obsolete factories so that you're not producing cars that you may not be able to sell, and 2, get rid of some of your debt cubes or some of your penalty cubes that you've incurred for having not sold cars or for making other mistakes such as not being able to place and sell with all of your salesmen. After you go through 3 actions each player, you're going to move on, and certain players will be able to take their abilities. For example, Howard is able to sell 2 cars regardless of demand first. After that, you're going to move on to selling cars through distributors, which is the sale room here, and you'll place your salesmen selling your cars for the prices and getting that money and going on. After everybody's sold their cars via distributors, we'll move on to executive decisions, which take place in this area down here in the board. And these are going to be things that you can do to modify your play. And it's beneficial to have a good spot in player order in this, because the first person will get to choose one of these spots, and then everybody else will choose subsequently. And there are several different options down here. The first one is this spot here, which you can see is kind of a grayed out factory. and this factory will allow you to close down one of your production spaces for free. Now this is beneficial again because maybe you have something way back, you're producing a bunch of brown cars back here, and since cars sell from newest to oldest, you may want to get rid of this spot so that you don't have to sell any of these cars, you don't have to produce any of these cars, and maybe you won't have to take a loss on them. After all of the executive decision actions are done, we will move on to selling via demand, and at this point, tiles that have been placed in these areas are going to flip up, and you'll see exactly what the demand is. And as I stated earlier, you're going to start selling with the newest cars, and you'll start selling with, for example, cheap cars, and you'll move back taking one car from each spot that has a factory built on it and that has cars produced, and selling them for the listed cost. Once you've gone through all of this and everybody's sold their cars, you'll move on to paying for all of your debt cubes, and these debt cubes are something that you definitely don't want to have. For every debt cube you have, depending on what turn it is, you'll have to pay a certain amount of money. And you can see in the first turn it's $10, in the second it's $20, $30, and $40 for each cube that you've incurred. And as I said, you'll get these cubes for not selling cars, or for not being able to place some of your salesmen and sell a card. After you go through all of the turns, you'll get cash for each factory you have remaining on the board, and whoever has the most cash at the end of the game will win. So there we have Automobile. Another very mathy game, again by Martin Wallace, so if you've played Age of Steam, or maybe you've played Steam or Brass, you know that he tends to have games that are very high in math, maybe not so important on the theme, but he does try and work it in there and make it interesting. I like Automobile. Now it's not as good as Brass, which does happen to be my favorite Martin Wallace game, but I think that this one provides something that Brass doesn't. It's a little bit shorter in time, it has some interesting character selection mechanisms, and it has a very, very severe system for not producing properly. If you produce too much, you're going to be paying debt like crazy. If you produce too little, you're not going to be earning enough money. So, that said, this is a game for people who can very well calculate what they're going to be needing to do on their turns. You need to make sure that you're not underestimating the demand, you need to make sure that you're not overestimating the demand, and this can be pretty easily calculated based on the averages of what tiles are available in the bag. So, if you like mathy games, if you like Martin Wallace, if you like risk-taking, or if you like the odds that maybe you're going to have to pay debt because of a mistake that you made throughout the game, pick up Automobile. But beware, it is not a forgiving game, and if you make a serious mistake, you will lose. Check it out. It's a great game. I suggest it, but it may not be for everybody.